coming up.
We're big Far Cry fans here at Eurogamer, and having spent a few hours with Far Cry 5 now, we're finding it to be a pretty nice mix of old and new. No matter how much you love the series, it was really in need of a big shake-up after Far Cry 3, Far Cry Blood Dragon, Far Cry 4 and Far Cry Primal offered up pretty similar gameplay experiences. So will Far Cry 5 have enough new things for players to do? We're thinking yes. Even in the short time we've spent with it, it's shown there are a few new ideas up its sleeve. Here are 9 ways Far Cry 5 is not like Far Cry 4, or any other Far Cry, for that matter. Far Cry 5 opens the game with something you've never been able to do before in a Far Cry game. You're given the option to choose between playing as a male or female character. With previous iterations, with protagonists like Jack and AJ and Jason and Takar, you were playing as a fully realised character with their own look, their own motivations and their own backstory. And though you could make certain choices throughout the stories that affected how that character behaved and what their ultimate fate was, who they were was more or less set in stone by the developers. In the case of Far Cry 2, you could choose your mercenary, but there wasn't any scope to make them your own. Additionally, none of these playable mercenaries were women, so although there have been female characters that you could call upon to help in the past, Far Cry 5 is the first time we're given the option to have a female protagonist. Whether male or female, your character is a rookie cop called in to deal with a dangerous cult. But, of course, things go wrong very quickly, and soon after you get your introduction to Hope County, you'll be treated to a character creation screen, another first for the series. Though we weren't able to capture any of that, rest assured that clothing options include a lot of plaid shirts for that authentic American feel. One of the most immediately noticeable changes that Far Cry 5 makes from previous Far Cry games is that it gets rid of the need to activate radio towers, a long-standing tradition in Far Cry that tasks players with climbing increasingly rickety and fortified structures in order to unlock portions of the overall open-world map, as well as highlighting places of interest and making fast travel to the area possible. While a lot of people enjoyed this process, myself included, I found it quite satisfying to do, there's no doubt it was beginning to feel a little stale. So, one of the first missions you do when you have full control in Far Cry 5 is to climb and fix a broken radio tower. But the quest giver, Dutch, slyly mentions that he won't be sending you to any more. You can actually climb the tower before he sends you on the mission, which feels like a very cruel practical joke without context, as you climb the tower to find nothing but a broken console at the top. Anyway, in place of radio towers, there are now lots of different ways to uncover things to do in Hope County. Different symbols will point to things you can investigate. Talking to people is one of the most obvious ways to find places of interest, but it's worth checking out pretty much everything you can get your hands on. Reading a fishing magazine will place fishing spot markers on your map, for example, or reading road signs might give you a little bit more detail on what you can find in a particular area. The reason for doing this, Ubisoft has said, is so that exploring the world feels like how you'd get information on a new area you'd visit in real life. It's less about ticking a box and getting information fed to you, and more about actually using your eyes and ears and treating Hope County as though it were a real place.
Shame we're shooting at all this shit.
And as all those changes and the exclusion of radio towers in general kind of suggests, one of the main things Ubisoft is keen to impress with Far Cry 5 is that it doesn't want you to feel led around by the nose from marker to marker, as it has kind of played out with past Far Cry games and, truthfully, with a lot of Ubisoft titles from the last few years. Far Cry 5 really wants you to read the environment that's laid out in front of you, and with that in mind, Far Cry 5 doesn't have a minimap. The development team made the decision to hide it, they say, so that players won't be sure of what to do or where to go. It's so that you're not staring at a little box in the corner of your screen, rushing towards whatever particular marker you've decided to focus on. You've got to actually pay attention to the world, maybe just wandering in one direction in the hopes that you find what you're looking for and getting distracted by something else entirely. Ubisoft says that Far Cry 5's art team has worked hard to make sure that the landscape is readable and interesting to navigate, and that there are good landmarks to help orient players. If anything, in the past Ubisoft has usually been a little bit too hand-holdy with players, making sure that everything is instant, easy and achievable. So it's good to see this semi-step back is being made to make Hope County feel more challenging, but more interesting and like a real place. With that in mind, the new mechanic of having routes to a waypoint appear on the road may break the illusion a little bit, but again it means you spend more time in the world rather than in a submenu or a minimap. And who wants to stare at a boring map screen when you could be setting off down the open road with your trusty bear companion on your...
I can't believe what just happened.
Whoops. He's fine.
Bounty hunt.
Apart from series spin-offs Primal and Blood Dragon, Far Cry games have always had multiplayer, in one form or another. They've also always had level editors. So how then does Far Cry 5 differ? Well, for a start, Far Cry 5 packages all the multiplayer, level editor, and single-player user-generated maps together in one place, called Far Cry Arcade. You can access Far Cry Arcade from the game's main menu, or from one of the many arcade machines dotted around the game world, like this one we found stashed away in Herc's garage. In Far Cry Arcade, players can finally create their own multiplayer maps again, an option that was removed from Far Cry 4 in favour of challenge maps only. The challenge maps still make an appearance in 5 though. They can be played in solo or co-op, and it looks like you'll be able to make different types of levels, from bounty hunt missions where you have to eliminate a certain enemy and escape, through to journey missions, which task you with finding the exit inside a user-created maze. While we haven't been able to get any solid details about map size or the amount of AI or assets you can put into each level, we were able to play a couple of preview maps made by Ubisoft, and they showed off something very interesting indeed. You see, not only can we build Far Cry maps using standard Far Cry building blocks, in Far Cry 5, other Ubisoft IPs have lent their assets to the editor as well. This level, for instance, has been made using assets from Watch Dogs. And in this level, we can see Blood Dragon eggs, which featured as a literal Easter egg in Far Cry Primal. The other IPs lending assets to the editor are Far Cry 4, Assassin's Creed Unity, and Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Perhaps there will be scope for adding even more Ubisoft titles to it in the future. I'm still holding out for Rabbids assets, mainly so I can dig a big pit, fill it full of bears, and see how long those annoying little things can last down there.
Awesome.
Although in past Far Cry titles it was certainly possible to bomb, shoot, or even punch fish to death, Far Cry 5 is the first game in the series to institutionalize fishing in the more traditional sense. And it's about time. Who doesn't love a bit of relaxing fishing? This guy knows what's up.
Fishing brings a body peace like nothing else.
You're able to equip a fishing rod to the utility submenu accessed by pressing R1 in the weapon wheel. Then, take yourself off to a nice secluded fishing spot and start casting. The fishing mechanic itself is fairly simple. Cast into water where you can see fish jumping, then reel in to attract some fish. You can activate some perks to help you with that too. Once you have a bite, you'll have to simultaneously reel while opposing the fish's movement with the right stick. It's simple but fun, and there'll almost definitely be plenty of prizes and rewards for keen fishers for netting rarer or bigger fish. Unless you feed them all to Cheeseburger first. Sure, fishing is one of those things that some players may ignore completely, and it's hardly going to radically reinvent Far Cry as a whole, but it's a nice idea for alternative activities within the main game that don't involve pointing and shooting. One of the core themes behind Far Cry 5 is the power to start a movement, to use your influence, win hearts and minds, and be part of something bigger than yourself. And here's the thing, you can't start a revolution all on your own. So, Guns for Hire is a new mechanic for Far Cry 5. It builds upon ideas touched on in previous games, and in particular Far Cry 4, where you could call in support from nameless NPCs. But it's much more in-depth. As you move through Hope County and make a name for yourself and your cause, you can build a roster of characters to support you on the ground. So rather than working as sort of a summonable action, these characters travel with you through the world. You need to earn their loyalty, however, so each gun for hire, or at least the ones you're going to want to have on your side, require undertaking multi-part side missions before characters become available to call upon. And there are plenty of guns to choose from too. In one short playable section of the game, we were able to unlock Jess and Herc, two individuals whose playstyles, a silent but deadly bow and a shoulder-mounted bazooka, respectively, couldn't be more different. That's something pretty great about Guns for Hire. It can be adapted to how you want to approach the game. If your playstyle is more close and personal, all guns blazing, you can call in Sniper Grace Armstrong for a bit of background support. If you suck at piloting planes or helicopters like I do, Nick Rye and Adelaide Drubman have you covered. It can be used to support you in the parts of Far Cry 5 you don't enjoy, or at least are a little bit weaker in. Having humans to call upon is new, especially the ones that can fly planes and helicopters and drive cars for you. But Fangs for Hire, the same system for furry and four-legged friends like Boomer the dog, Cheeseburger the bear and Peaches the puma, is not as new, as it pretty much builds on the Beastmaster mechanic found in Far Cry Primal, right down to the ability to pet your companions, and the animation that ensues when you do. Still, who's gonna complain about that when they're such good boys?
Getting a better angle.
Another thing that appears to be new to Far Cry 5, but we don't fully understand yet, is that enemies seem to be able to be knocked down, but not outright killed. In a manner similar to how your allies will be put into a down state where you can revive them, enemies seem to have a similar mechanic where they're down but not completely out in combat. We'd kind of finished them off before we could fully investigate whether they were capable of reviving one another, but if so, does this dazed state point to enemies that behave more like other players and are able to work together as a team, supporting one another and not have their behaviors limited to just pointing and shooting? One to keep an eye on, for sure.
I owe you big time.
A new mechanic to Far Cry 5 that feels far better suited to exploring an open world at your own leisure is the resistance meter. This tracks how much influence you have in a particular region of the map and gives you an idea of how far you need to go before the cult leader of the area takes notice of you, and presumably moves the main story along, or at least gives you the option to activate the next story mission yourself. You gain resistance points in lots of different ways: saving captured citizens, destroying Eden's Gate structures, completing side missions and liberating outposts from cultists, to name a few. It seems to tie into Far Cry 5's philosophy of not having the player simply moving directly from one objective marker to the next, and has completing activities that have been part of the Far Cry experience for a while now anyway, folding organically into the overall narrative. It's a pretty good fit from what we've seen so far.
Pleased to get their place back. Making a move.
Lastly, a thing the Far Cry 5 has that no other Far Cry had? America. Or more specifically, this particular brand of gorgeous big sky country that is at once familiar and, with the spread of the Project Eden's Gate cult, deeply twisted. Far Cry has always kind of been about the unfamiliar, largely untouched wildernesses that the player character must fight for survival in, against human enemies, but also nature itself. It'll be interesting to see what Ubisoft does with a setting that goes a little outside that mould. Hope County is a largely hostile unknown place still, but it's a far more urban setting than any Far Cry game we've seen so far, and it's populated with lots of potential friends and civilians, not just crazed cultists and wild animals. That's bound to shake up the formula, at least a little bit. Not only that, but with the inclusion of characters like Herc's dad, who's running for state senate with a slogan to "Make Hope County Great Again," Far Cry 5 is tapping into conversations that are hot-button topics in America right now. Will it have anything to say about the political situation it's satirizing, or is it here to just poke fun? Time will tell. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check out our longer co-op Let's Play of Far Cry 5, a single-player Let's Play set in a different region than the one featured here, or maybe take a closer look at Hope County's great Testicle Festival, or the things you can do in the first hour of the game. Do give us a like if you enjoyed, or even think about subscribing if you want to see more from Far Cry 5 on Eurogamer as we get closer to launch. Thanks for watching. Bye!